Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a problematic weather pattern that's developing across the United States right now that's going to continue to cause travel impacts throughout the rest of this weekend. In addition to this will start to lead to multiple more storms as we go into the late week. A fairly large winter heat wave will also be coming to the country throughout the next 7 to 10 days. I'll be giving you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, and let's begin with what's happening across the United States right now. And we will begin with the southeast United States, and this is an area that's actually going to be very active over the next 48 to 72 hours, and that is all due to a very strong southerly wind that's pulling moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico, and that's going to dump tons of rainfall across the Gulf Coast and as well as back through Florida over the next 48 hours. And all of this is going to continue to move to the east, bringing lots of rainfall to the southeast. In addition to that, there is a lot of cloud cover that's spreading across much of the southeast quadrant. Now, back into the northeast, this has been an interesting area because we just saw some snow move out earlier this morning, which, by the way, there was upwards of a foot of snow in very isolated parts of Pennsylvania and even into northern New Jersey. This was actually a pretty overperformed event when it came to the snowfall. There were very isolated areas that saw up to a foot of snow. Meanwhile, areas like Maryland barely even saw an inch for the most part. So it was a very interesting weather event that occurred yesterday, but all of that activity has now moved offshore, and behind this is actually going to be colder air that's all coming out of Canada, and this is from an Arctic blast that's actually originating back up in parts of Canada, and all that cold air is sitting up there for the most part, but we are getting some of those impacts back into the Midwest, the southern plains even, where areas like Texas barely even got into the 40s today, and even back into the northeast United States where it's a bit chilly for this time of the year. And then back over on the west coast, things are staying pretty active over there. We still have multiple rounds of storms coming that direction. That'll continue to bring some rainfall and even some high winds along the immediate coastline. And then much of the Great Plains today all the way through the week will be fairly dry, and also it's going to get pretty warm in some areas. Areas like Texas will be cranking into the 90s once we get closer to Wednesday. More on that here later in this forecast. Now let's talk more about the weather pattern that's happening across the United States right now. And to look at that, we're going to check out the jet stream. This gives us an idea of the weather patterns that are happening across the United States. And notice this, by the way, this is actually tonight on Saturday night. Notice a strong area of winds back over on the east coast of the United States. Now, these winds are all aloft. We're talking 30, 40, 50,000 feet up in the atmosphere. It's very interesting because we have wind speeds around 200 knots. This is actually causing a ton of turbulence. So if you have any travel plans this weekend into early next week, don't be surprised with some delays purely due to how strong the jet stream is. Now, overall, as we go into Sunday into Monday, that jet stream is going to weaken a little bit, but it will still stay pretty persistent across areas in the northeast. But notice this as we go into Monday and Tuesday of next week. We're going to have a couple of different features to watch for across the United States. The first one will be a small trough back over in the Midwest. This is actually not really going to bring any rainfall. It might bring a small little cold front, pretty weak overall, but it's not really going to be much. More importantly, we're going to be watching for a large ridge to develop back over in the southwest United States and into Mexico, and this will move off to the east as we go into Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and this will build a winter heat wave across the southern tier and even into the central plains of the United States by Wednesday and Thursday. This will lead to some areas in Texas going to the 80s and 90s for high temperatures, which is something that does not happen very often in February. So this will be pretty interesting overall. Another thing to point out is as we go into Wednesday, if you're traveling again by airplane, this is going to be a pretty large jet stream, and anywhere in the red or yellows representing the potential, at least for some turbulence due to the wind speeds aloft being anywhere from 100 to 150 knots, which again will cause some turbulence in the upper atmosphere. Now at the surface, we're not talking about those winds. This is only in the upper atmosphere. Once we go into Thursday into Friday, though, that jet stream begins to weaken a little bit, and I do think we're going to have a little bit more activity as we go into the weekend. And where that activity will be, probably back over in the northeast United States, where there will probably be some troughing, either coming out of Canada or something along those lines, and this could bring the potential for some snowfall in the north and east, or at least just rain. We'll be watching to see what the temperatures are going to be over the next several days, because this could either turn into a snow event or it'll be purely rain. We'll have to watch those details very closely over the next few days. By next week, around the very end of February, so around February 26th, February 27th, we will need to watch for the potential for a negatively tilted trough to develop, and that'll come out of the Pacific Ocean. And we'll have to watch as this goes across like the Rocky Mountains, for example, because this is the time of the year where we start to get negatively tilted troughs, and those typically lead to those severe weather events in the Great Plains. And we are getting close to severe weather season, so this is definitely in play. But with that being said, we are still multiple days out from that happening. Things could easily change over the next several days. Now let's put this more into picture on the future radar, giving you an idea of who's going to be seeing rain, who will see snow over the next several days, and if anybody's going to even see severe weather. So beginning with tomorrow, that's Sunday, we will have a little bit of snow back up in the northeast from a trough that's going to move across areas in southern Canada. Overall, not really impressive when it comes to snowfall totals. We might see an additional coating to 3 inches of snow, but again, not really anything to write home about. Notice back down in Florida, by the way, the Daytona 500 is happening this weekend. Pretty big event for racing. There's going to be a lot of rain down there. I'm pretty sure this is getting postponed to Monday, but there's going to be a ton of rain all the way through Sunday. That'll lead to some flooding potential down there as well. This all moves out, though, as we go into late Monday. Overall, most of that rain will be offshore. Once we go into Tuesday, we're going to have dominant high-pressure systems, and these are all at the surface, so pretty dominant ridges overall, stretching from Canada back into the southern plains. So things going to stay pretty dry. Notice that upper level low. It's really not going to bring anything, and you really can't even see it, but there's an upper level low that's going to track across the Midwest Monday into Tuesday. That might bring an isolated shower, but again, really nothing to write home about there either. Once we go into Tuesday into Wednesday, things going to stay pretty quiet for most of the country. What we'll need to watch for is Thursday into Friday. There's a potential for maybe a small snow event back up in the northeast. What we will have to watch for more closely, though, is going into late Thursday through Friday, a much stronger trough could develop, and this will come from the Rocky Mountains or so through areas in the Central Plains, eventually going into the Ohio Valley. This is expected to dump a lot of rainfall across much of the Ohio Valley and back into the East Coast, where plenty of rain is possible, but what we're going to have to watch for going to Friday is if there will be any snow out of this event. And one of the biggest problems that we're having as weather forecasters is essentially if this is actually going to drop snow, because the uncertainty is pretty large with this particular disturbance. Obviously, we're talking about 7 days out from now, and the snow potential is a bit of a question mark, but one thing that we do know is that there's a high likelihood that we'll have at least a strong low pressure system. It'll at least bring some rainfall and perhaps even some high winds along the coast, but again, will the temperatures be cold enough is a big question mark with this system, especially with that winter heat wave that's going to be settling in this week across much of the country. We might get some snow on the backside of the low pressure system, perhaps like a day after it moves through, but that wouldn't really be meaningful snow. We'd be talking about very light snowfall overall across those areas. And then again, once we go into next week, things become a lot more uncertain, and I'm talking the very end of the month. There might be some sort of strong negatively tilted trough that brings severe weather across the Great Plains, but again, it's super uncertain right now since we're still talking over a week out from now. This is the GFS model, by the way, so just kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about here with the uncertainty. Actually, this low pressure system on the GFS model arrives about a day earlier than the European model. In addition to that, it's a bit of a weaker low pressure system, but notice how much more snow the GFS model is picturing here across the north and east. So again, the question mark is really going to be where the snow falls, and will we even see snow? It's going to be a big question mark with the temperatures, in addition to where that low pressure system tracks. Now, over the next several days, I mentioned this earlier, that there's going to be a winter heat wave. Now, this does not mean the entire country is going to 90s and 100s. No, that's not what that means. Overall, though, we're going to see above average temperatures for most of the country. Going into tomorrow morning, below average temperatures from Texas all the way back through the northeast is expected, but that'll quickly evaporate as we go into early next week with much warmer weather entering the country. This is all going to be from a basically, again, quote unquote winter heat wave, where much of the country will be above average in terms of temperatures. And notice how that builds in the southern plains even as we go into Thursday. Again, many areas in Texas will get into the 80s and 90s, so very unseasonably warm. Once we go into Friday into Saturday, things will get closer to average again in the country. And then as we go into the next week, again, things become quite uncertain. We'll probably get some sort of cold air to move into the north and east as we go into next weekend, as long as that low pressure system stays on track. So that'll be something to watch for, but again, no Arctic blast really in the forecast at this point. Tomorrow morning, most of the country actually will be below freezing. This will go all the way down into southern Mississippi and even down into central Texas, where below freezing temperatures are in the forecast. By the time we get closer to Tuesday, notice high temperatures in the 70s and 80s in Texas and as well as Oklahoma. By Wednesday, this will likely be the warmest day of the week. We could have our highest temperature so far of the year perhaps happen in West Texas, with temperatures near the mid 90s being possible. So that'll be definitely something to watch for as we go into Wednesday. Wednesday does appear as the warmest day of the week at this point. Wind chills tomorrow morning, by the way, will be down below 32 degrees across much of the Gulf Coast. That does not mean we're going to have below freezing temperatures there. It just means when you walk outside, it will feel a little bit colder due to the winds. Also, Climate Prediction Center on board for above average temperatures all the way through the end of the month into early March. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.